I was 29 years old the night my father's boot slammed into my chest and sent me crashing onto the cold kitchen tiles. The air shot from my lungs in a brutal rush, and for several seconds I could not inhale again. My mouth opened desperately, but only a metallic taste filled it, as blood seeped from the corner of my lips and dotted the white floor beneath me. Harold Ellis, 63, and still carrying the authority of a retired police chief, stood above me with rage swelling his face. His voice thundered across the room. "You do not ever say no to me!" His boot had not been meant to bruise. It had been meant to crush. I curled inward, clutching my ribs, while pain spiked through me with every shallow gasp. Around me, the world shrank to the tick of the wall clock and the sharp sound of blood dripping onto tile. My younger brother Jason sprawled on the couch with his phone held high. The glow of TikTok live comments reflected on his grin. He did not flinch at my struggle. Instead, he smirked and said to his faceless viewers, "She is just being dramatic again." He laughed softly, not at me, but at the way his audience responded to my pain, as though it were part of his performance. My mother Linda stood at the sink with her back turned to everything. The clatter of dishes and the steady rush of water drowned out the silence that should have been filled with her rushing to me. She did not turn around. She did not speak. She continued scrubbing as if blood and gasping lungs behind her were invisible. The kitchen clock ticked louder with each passing second. My vision blurred until its hands wavered in a haze. The scent of iron thickened in my nose, mixing with soap from the sink. My palms searched the tile for balance, but my arms trembled too violently to lift me. Harold stepped closer, his shadow stretching across my body. His eyes burned with fury, not because of money, but because I had defied him. "You think you are free?" he growled. "You think you can refuse me?" My throat ached to answer, but no sound came. Jason chuckled again, his laugh echoing in rhythm with notifications from his phone. In that moment, I was not his sister, but a storyline his audience could mock. Another drop of blood splattered the tile and spread outward in a crimson bloom. My pulse roared in my ears while my chest fought to open against the crushing ache. Finally, a thin thread of air slipped into my lungs, scorching as it reached deep. I coughed violently and more blood sprayed across the floor. I stayed pressed against the tile, my cheek cold, my eyes fixed on the red pool expanding beneath me. For 29 years, I had remained silent inside this house, swallowing words and wants in exchange for survival. Tonight, that silence shattered with a single word. My father towered above me, my brother laughed from the couch, my mother scrubbed dishes at the sink, and I lay on the ground staring at the proof spreading across the floor. I had said no for the first time in my life, and blood was spilled. The Ellis household in Fort Collins, Colorado, had always been a place where silence weighed heavier than words, and obedience mattered more than truth. My father, Harold Ellis, a retired police chief, carried himself like he still wore the badge and the gun. Even after leaving the force, he walked with the authority of a man who expected every order to be followed without question. In his mind, control was not just a part of parenting, it was the foundation of respect. If you obeyed, you were loved. If you disobeyed, you were punished. He had ruled our house for decades, not with affection, but with command, and when those commands were resisted, the consequences were swift. My mother, Linda, a former schoolteacher, moved quietly around him like a shadow. She kept the house clean, cooked dinner, attended church, and never raised her voice above a calm hum. When Harold shouted, she did not intervene. When he struck me or Jason, she smoothed the situation with excuses. "He only yells because he cares," she would say, or "he has been under stress." In truth, she enabled him by refusing to acknowledge the damage he caused. Her calmness was a mask that hid her complicity. My younger brother Jason, once the pride of the family, was now a different story. At 25, he had been a promising athlete in high school, a running back who almost received a scholarship to a major college program. But injuries and poor grades derailed that path. Instead of building a career, Jason discovered social media. He reinvented himself as a clout chaser on TikTok, staging stunts, acting out dramas, and begging his followers for donations. He called it content creation, but most saw it as online panhandling dressed in flashy edits. He lived in the house unemployed, contributing nothing but soaking in the applause of strangers on the internet. To my father, Jason was still the golden boy, the son who carried dreams Harold never realized. To me, Jason was a parasite who believed that everyone owed him success. I had become the opposite of Jason. I worked as a software engineer specializing in medical systems. My focus was telehealth platforms aimed at helping hospitals treat patients remotely, especially low-income veterans. My work was demanding and exhausting, but it paid. Since my early 20s, I had been the one covering property taxes, utility bills, groceries, and even health expenses. Whenever Harold retired early after a supposed back injury, it was me who took up the financial slack. Linda had not worked in years, and Jason never held a steady job. Every month, my paycheck was siphoned into the family under the guise of necessity. It became routine. My father would hand me an envelope of overdue bills, or my mother would quietly suggest that Jason needed new shoes for his brand. I gave because it was easier than fighting. That pattern cemented me as the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who never said no. Until the day I did. It started with Jason slamming a glossy brochure on the kitchen table. His voice was excited, his face glowing with the pride of someone who thought he had discovered the secret to fame. "This retreat in Maui will reset my energy," he declared. "It is a healing event for influencers. I need to attend or I will lose momentum with my audience." He pushed the flyer toward me, pointing at the price. $15,000. He said it like it was a minor sum, like the money I earned did not belong to me at all. $15,000, I repeated in disbelief. Jason leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "You have it. You are always saving anyway. Think of it as investing in me." Harold entered the kitchen at that moment, his eyes already sharp with expectation. He looked from Jason to me and then to the brochure. "She will cover it," he announced, as if the matter was already decided. I shook my head slowly and said the word that had been buried for so long. "No." The room went still. Jason's smirk faltered. Linda froze at the sink. Harold's face darkened like a storm gathering on the horizon. "No," he repeated, his voice low with menace. "You do not get to say no in this house." I kept my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "It is my money. I will not fund a vacation for Jason." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Harold's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. It was not the $15,000 that enraged him, though that number was outrageous. It was the act of defiance itself. In his world, saying no was rebellion. To him, rebellion had only one answer. The kick came swiftly and brutally. His boot slammed into my chest, knocking me backward. My body hit the floor and blood rushed up my throat. I gasped, unable to breathe. Jason laughed softly, calling me dramatic as he pointed his phone at his screen. Linda turned her back to me, scrubbing harder at the dishes. The kitchen became a stage, and I was the spectacle. In that moment, I understood the truth. My father was not protecting family honor or demanding fairness. He was asserting dominance. My brother was not seeking help, but exploiting everyone around him. My mother was not keeping peace, but preserving her denial. The Ellis family was a kingdom built on obedience, with Harold as King Jason, as the favored Prince Linda as the quiet queen, and me as the servant who paid for everything. For years, I had accepted my role because speaking out seemed pointless and resisting seemed dangerous. But lying there with blood on the floor, I realized something had shifted. I had said no, and that word had broken the only rule that truly mattered in the Ellis household. It was never about money. It was always about control. To understand why I stayed as long as I did, you have to go back to when I was 15 years old and still believed that someone outside our walls could save us. That year, Harold came home drunk after a retirement party thrown by the police department. His temper was short and his hands heavy. My mother dropped a plate in the kitchen and he struck her across the face so hard she stumbled into the counter. I was terrified and ran upstairs to call 911. When the officers arrived, I felt relief, thinking finally someone would see what was happening and step in. But the moment they stepped through the door, Harold's demeanor changed. He straightened his uniform shirt that he still wore with pride and greeted them with a smile. "Officers, thanks for coming." he said in a calm, practiced voice. "My daughter here got scared over nothing." He pulled them aside and spoke quietly in tones of camaraderie, reminding them of years of shared service and favors owed. When the officers left without filing a report, I stood frozen. Instead of protection, I received a glare that chilled me to the bone. Harold's voice cracked like a whip. "Never betray this family again." That night, my mother pressed a cold towel to her cheek and whispered that everything was fine, that sometimes a man just loses his temper. I wanted to scream that it was not fine, but the lesson was already etched into me. The system would not help. At 19, I tried again. By then, Harold had become more volatile. Jason the golden boy could do no wrong. When he crashed our mother's car, Harold shouted at me for not reminding Jason to drive carefully. When Jason failed a class, it was my fault for creating stress in the house. I carried responsibility for every failure, but no recognition for any sacrifice. One night, Harold shoved me so hard into the wall that my arm bruised for weeks. This time, I decided I could not stay silent. I filed for a restraining order. I remember the courthouse lobby, the sterile smell of paper and ink, the echo of my shoes against the tile. I thought I was finally breaking free, but Linda followed me to the courthouse. She wept in front of the judge, begging them not to tarnish Harold's name, not to destroy our family reputation. She clutched my arm so tightly my skin ached. The judge looked at me with pity, but no real intention to intervene. Faced with my mother's tears and the weight of Harold's reputation, I withdrew my request. On the drive home, Linda thanked me through sobs as if I had done something noble. I stared out the window ashamed. That day sealed the coffin of my trust in the system. Afterward, I stopped reaching out. I told myself that survival meant compliance. For years, I swallowed words and endured blows because the alternatives seemed worse. At home, Harold was both warden and judge. He monitored every movement. He demanded to know where I spent my paycheck and why. If I tried to save money, he called it disloyalty. If I suggested Jason contribute, he slammed his fist on the table and accused me of shaming my brother. Jason smirked through it all, living rent-free, posting clips on TikTok complaining about haters while I paid for the electricity that charged his devices. He mocked me with phrases like, "Relax, sis, it is just money," or "You are too uptight, you should thank me for making the family famous." Linda never contradicted them. She hummed while cooking or cleaning as if sound could drown out reality. When Harold raised his voice, she soothed him later with gentle touches. When Jason demanded new clothes, she slipped my credit card into his hands. Her silence was worse than words. It told me that my pain did not matter. My sanctuary was my room, yet even that space bore scars. A crack in the plaster stretched across the ceiling above my bed from an old leak never repaired. I used to hate it. It reminded me of neglect. Over time, it became a mirror of myself. A fracture ignored a wound left to widen. At night, I lay staring at it, replaying memories of times I had dared to resist and the punishment that followed. My father's slap when I asked Jason to look for work. My mother's disappointment when I suggested we cut back on spending. Jason's laughter when I cried silently after paying another bill. Each incident stacked like bricks, building a wall that kept me trapped. Why did I endure? Because every attempt to break free had been crushed either by Harold's authority, by my mother's pleas, or by the indifference of a system that valued his badge more than my bruises. In school, I excelled, believing good grades would offer an escape. College gave me a taste of independence, but when I graduated with debt and my family drowning in unpaid taxes, I returned home temporarily, or so I thought. Harold insisted it was only right that I contribute since I had benefited from his roof all those years. Temporarily stretched into years. Each paycheck went first to bills, then to Jason's needs, then to Harold's demands. I told myself it was the price of peace. I convinced myself that as long as I kept them stable, I could carve out small corners of freedom. But freedom never came. Each sacrifice tightened the leash. Each compromise silenced my voice further. By the time I was in my late 20s, I barely recognized myself. Friends asked why I never moved out. I lied about saving for a down payment. Coworkers wondered why I seemed exhausted. I blamed long hours. The truth was uglier. I lived inside a cage disguised as a home, and every attempt to open the door had been slammed shut. The day Jason demanded $15,000 was not unusual in scale. It was unusual in my response. Saying no was unthinkable in our family. It was defiance against the king. Harold's fury that night was not about the money. It was about power. He had spent decades teaching me that my role was to provide and obey. When I broke that rule, even with a single word, he exploded. And yet, as I lay bleeding on the floor, staring at the familiar crack in the ceiling, I realized something had shifted inside me. The old lessons about futility, about silence, about obedience no longer held the same weight. I had endured because I thought resistance was impossible. That night taught me that endurance would never save me. Jason entered the kitchen late in the afternoon, carrying a glossy flyer folded in half like it was a ticket to destiny. His hair was messy from filming a new TikTok skit, and his phone buzzed constantly with notifications. He dropped the paper onto the table with a flourish and grinned as if he had just landed a professional contract. "This is it, sis," he said, pointing at the palm trees and ocean waves printed across the page. "A healing retreat in Maui. All the top influencers are going. This will reset my energy and expand my brand." He tapped the bold numbers at the bottom. $15,000. My jaw tightened as I scanned the flyer. $15,000 for yoga sessions and motivational talks disguised as business investment. Jason's eyes shone with the certainty of someone who never had to worry about earning anything. He leaned back in his chair, stretching lazily. "You will cover it," he added, not as a question, but as a fact. Harold walked in just then with the slow, heavy steps of a man who expected the room to adjust around him. His eyes landed on Jason, then on me, then on the flyer. He nodded once. "She will cover it." He did not even wait for my answer. I had lived my whole life following this script. Jason demanded my father endorsed, my mother ignored, and I complied. But something in me cracked. Maybe it was the bruise that still throbbed on my ribs from his last outburst. Maybe it was the endless bills I had paid while Jason live-streamed his fake hardships. Maybe it was the sheer arrogance of hearing $15,000 thrown at me like pocket change. Whatever the reason, my voice broke the silence. "No." Jason blinked as if he had misheard. My mother froze at the sink sponge in hand. Harold turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing like a predator spotting prey. "What did you say he asked?" I swallowed hard but kept my voice steady. I said no. "I am not paying for this." Jason's smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief. "Come on, sis, you have it. You are always saving anyway. Think of it as investing in me." I shook my head. "My money is mine. I work for it. I will not fund a vacation disguised as work." Jason's face twisted. "You are so selfish. Do you want me to fail? Do you want everyone to see me as a loser?" His voice rose, but it was nothing compared to the storm building in Harold's expression. He took a step closer, his fists clenched. "In this house, no is not an option. You live here because of me. You eat my food. You sleep under my roof. Your paycheck is not yours. It belongs to this family." His words pounded like hammers. I wanted to shrink back, but something inside held firm. For years, I had told myself silence was safer, but silence had cost me everything. So I spoke again. "I will not pay." The kitchen grew colder. Jason sputtered excuses. Mom whispered, "Nora, please do not start this." But Harold's fury drowned them out. He moved faster than I expected, his boot slamming into my chest with a force that rattled my bones. I crashed onto the floor, gasping for air, blood rising in my throat. My vision blurred, and I heard Jason's laugh echoing through the haze. "She is just being dramatic again." His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced consequences. My mother turned back to the dishes, scrubbing harder, as if the sound of porcelain could erase the violence behind her. On the ground, my body screamed with pain, but my mind was sharper than ever. I stared at the ceiling and saw that familiar crack, jagged and unhealed. It had been there for years, ignored like every wound in this family. My lungs fought for air, but my spirit did not waver. "Never again," I whispered to myself, though no one could hear. Never again would I let obedience be mistaken for love. Never again would I bleed for their control. I closed my eyes for a moment, tasting the blood in my mouth and hearing the relentless tick of the clock on the wall. It marked each second of my defiance. When I opened them, Harold still towered above me, Jason still mocked me, and Linda still turned away. But something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the daughter who endured. I was the woman who had finally said no and discovered that survival meant more than silence. It meant standing, even if it meant falling first. That day, the price of my refusal was blood on the floor, but the value of that single word, no, was freedom waiting to be claimed. I locked the bathroom door behind me with hands that shook so hard I almost dropped the bolt into place. My chest burned with each shallow breath, and the taste of iron coated my tongue. I turned on the light and stared at the mirror. A smear of blood streaked across my chin, and my shirt clung damply to my skin. Slowly, I lifted the fabric and saw the dark bruise already spreading across my chest where Harold's boot had landed. The skin was swelling purple and red, a grotesque flower blooming across my ribs. I pressed my fingers gingerly to the edge and winced as pain shot through me like fire. The thought of a hospital flickered through my mind, but I shoved it away. I knew better. Harold's warning rang in my ears. If you ever involve outsiders, you will regret it. And I believed him because I had seen how quickly he could twist narratives and how easily others would side with him. He was still respected in town as the retired chief, a man who served with honor, or so they thought. My mother would beg me not to shame the family. My brother would laugh. I would end up looking hysterical or disloyal. So I stayed in that locked bathroom, gripping the sink and swallowing my pain in silence. The faucet dripped a steady rhythm, echoing the tick of the kitchen clock outside. I wiped my mouth with a damp towel, watching the water turn pink. For a moment, I imagined calling a friend or driving away, but the weight of years pressed down on me. Every time I had tried to break free, it had collapsed under pressure. The bruise pulsed with each heartbeat, but something else pulsed beneath it, a new clarity. I was done being their provider, their scapegoat, their silent servant. "This ends with me," I whispered, staring into my own reflection. The words sounded foreign but steady. My face looked pale and tired, yet there was something in my eyes I had not seen before, a quiet certainty. I sank to the floor, resting my back against the cool porcelain tub. Each breath was a negotiation between pain and necessity, but I found a rhythm. I studied the bruise again, its jagged edges, its deepening color, and thought of all the invisible wounds I had carried before. Those never showed on skin, but they cut just as deep. The insults, the demands, the endless bills. The way Harold called me ungrateful when I asked for space. The way Linda scolded me for making things difficult whenever I hesitated to hand over money. The way Jason mocked me for being uptight while draining my bank account. Now there was proof written across my body. Proof that love here was nothing but control. I pulled out my phone and almost dialed 911. My thumb hovered over the screen before I locked it again. No one would come to save me. I had learned that long ago. If I wanted out, I would have to save myself. I stood slowly, bracing against the counter, and splashed cold water on my face. The blood was gone from my chin, but the bruise remained. I slipped on a hoodie baggy enough to hide the damage and tied the strings tight. Looking into the mirror, I practiced a smile until it looked almost believable. I would walk out of that bathroom and no one would know how much I hurt. They would think I had folded again. Let them believe it. Silence had always been my cage, but now it would be my shield. When I finally opened the door, the house sounded deceptively normal. The clatter of dishes had stopped. Jason's laugh floated faintly from the living room as he scrolled through his comments. Harold's heavy footsteps moved upstairs. I walked past them unnoticed and climbed to my room. Closing the door, I slid the lock in place and collapsed on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The crack above me stretched across the plaster like a scar. I had hated it once, but now I saw it differently. It was the most honest thing in the house. A wound that refused to vanish no matter how many times they ignored it. I traced the line with my eyes and let the thought root inside me. Never again. The bruise on my chest throbbed with each breath, but it was not just pain anymore. It was a reminder of what they were willing to do and a reminder of what I would no longer tolerate. I closed my eyes, listening to the stillness of the house around me, and clung to that thought, never again. The following week, I tried to move through my days as if nothing had happened, but the bruise on my chest reminded me with every movement that silence had a price. At work, I wore loose blouses and kept my posture stiff so no one would see me flinch. My office was my only refuge, a place where I was not Harold's daughter or Jason's wallet, but Nora Ellis project lead for a telehealth initiative designed to connect low-income veterans with medical professionals. I poured myself into it because it felt meaningful. For once, my efforts mattered and no one could take that away. Or so I thought. It was a Tuesday morning when I received the email from Human Resources requesting that I stop by their office at lunch. My stomach tightened. HR emails rarely meant good news. When I arrived, my manager and the HR rep were seated side by side, their expressions neutral but uneasy. "Nora, we have had some concerning communications," they began. "Anonymous emails have been sent to corporate claiming that you have been unstable at work and possibly misusing patient data." My pulse raced. "That is not true," I said quickly. "I know," they replied, "we have no evidence against you and your team has only spoken highly of your performance. But by policy, we are required to open a case file and document the concern." I sat frozen, my mind spinning. Patient data. That accusation was deadly in my field. Even the suggestion of impropriety could ruin my reputation. My thoughts leapt immediately to Harold. He had threatened before to call my boss if I ever disobeyed. He had promised to end my career if I embarrassed the family. The bruise on my ribs throbbed in agreement. I forced myself to breathe and nodded. Of course I understand procedure. I walked back to my office in a haze. Each step echoed like a countdown. He had reached into my workplace, the one sanctuary I had left. My projects, my colleagues, my future, all tainted by his vindictive hand. That night at home, Harold sat smugly in his recliner watching television while Jason scrolled TikTok laughing at his own clips. Neither looked at me, but I felt their satisfaction in the air. They wanted me cornered. Linda hummed in the kitchen as if harmony could erase Sabotage. I clenched my jaw and walked to my room without a word. In bed, my phone glowed with work messages about documentation requests from HR. I stared at the screen, my chest aching. Anger and fear wrestled inside me until anger began to win. He had tried to kick me into silence. When that failed, he reached for my career. He wanted me to break, but I would not. At least, not yet. The next day, I provided HR with every requested file, meticulous clean records showing compliance with all privacy protocols. My manager offered quiet support, but the damage was done. A whisper of suspicion now floated around my name. I could feel it in the careful smiles of colleagues. Harold's shadow had reached even here. For the rest of the week, I worked with mechanical precision, masking the turmoil inside me. Every keystroke was a defiance, every completed task a shield. But the truth pressed heavier with each day. My family was not satisfied with draining my bank account. They were dismantling my identity piece by piece. By Friday, Jason posted a TikTok complaining about toxic relatives who do not support your dreams. His followers flooded the comments with sympathy and donations. I recognized his manipulative script because I had lived it all my life. And beneath his theatrics, he smirked at me across the room, daring me to confront him. I said nothing, but my silence had changed. It was no longer surrender. It was strategy. That weekend, I opened my laptop intending to bury myself in code to reclaim some sense of control. Instead, I was met with an error message. Access denied. File corrupted. My pulse spiked. I tried again and again, but the project I had been building for months refused to open. Panic rose in my chest. I checked my backups. Empty. My hands shook as I opened browser history. An unfamiliar login had accessed my cloud storage 2 nights earlier. The account was linked to Jason's email. My breath came short. He had stolen from me. My Project Veterans Telecare. The system I had poured countless nights into was gone. The platform meant to help vulnerable people had been hijacked by someone who barely understood what an API was. Rage burned through me hotter than any bruise. I stormed downstairs, my voice low but shaking. "Jason, what did you do to my files?" He looked up lazily from his phone. "Chill, sis, I just shared them with a friend. He is helping me pitch the idea to a startup. Said he could get investors." I stared at him stunned. "You stole my work." He shrugged. "You live here. What is yours is ours. Remember Dad said that." Harold appeared in the doorway, his expression already set in stone. "Do not raise your voice in my house." "He stole my project," I snapped. "He stole months of work." Harold scoffed. "Do not act like you invented something special. You are lucky to have a roof over your head. Stop acting like a victim." Jason smirked and turned back to his phone. Linda glanced over from the sink but said nothing. The scene was so familiar yet entirely different because inside me something had shifted. The fear was still there, but it had hardened into resolve. I walked upstairs without another word, locked my door, and sat on the bed trembling. My family had sabotaged my body, my career, and now my dream. They wanted me broken beyond repair, but they had underestimated me. Their sabotage was no longer the end. It was the beginning of my plan to fight back. I sat at my desk, staring at the error message still pulsing on my screen as if mocking me. Veterans Telecare had been more than a job, it was a vision. The system was designed to give veterans in rural areas access to doctors through secure telehealth channels. It mattered because Harold's old colleagues, many of them struggling with healthcare, had no resources. I wanted to build something that filled that gap, and now it was gone, siphoned away by the very people who called me family. My fingers trembled as I clicked through every folder, hoping against hope that some fragment had been spared. Nothing. Then I opened Jason's TikTok out of a morbid need to confirm the truth. There it was. A grainy screenshot of my interface displayed on his feed, accompanied by his grinning face. "Big startup collab coming soon," he captioned with emojis of rockets and money bags. My chest tightened. He had no idea what any of the code meant, but he had plastered my work on social media as if it were his brainchild. The comments from his followers gushed with congratulations. "So proud of you, Jason. Can't wait to see your app. Keep grinding, king." Each word felt like salt in an open wound. I scrolled down and saw a short video clip. Jason bragging to a friend on speakerphone. "Yeah, man, I pitched my sister's code to this startup. They loved it. Said we could get funding." I muted the sound halfway through, unable to stomach any more. My project had been stolen and paraded publicly, and if I confronted him, Harold would back him. He always did. The next morning, I tried to verify Jason's claim. Through LinkedIn searches and quick emails, I discovered he had indeed contacted a small Denver startup specializing in wellness tech. He had sent them a stripped-down version of my mock-up along with buzzwords he barely understood. To my horror, they had responded positively at first. They wanted to schedule a meeting. They thought they were speaking to the creator. My stomach dropped as I realized the damage. In tech, reputation is currency. If his sloppy theft tainted my design before I could present it myself, no one would trust me again. I walked into the kitchen where Jason sat with his laptop open, pretending to work. "How could you do this?" I asked quietly. He glanced up and grinned. "Relax, sis. This is good for both of us. You make the boring code, I make the connections. That is how teams work." I clenched my fists. "You never asked." "This was my work." He shrugged. "You live here. It is family property. You should be thanking me for giving it a chance." Harold walked in, overhearing the last part. "Enough whining, Nora. Your brother is trying to make something of himself. You should support him." I stared at both of them, realizing there was no appeal. Jason's theft was not just tolerated, it was endorsed. I turned away, swallowing my rage. Upstairs in my room, I opened a new document and began writing down everything. Every bill I had paid, every threat Harold had made, every instance Jason exploited me. I took screenshots of his TikTok posts and saved them. I copied his comments bragging about pitching my code. I was no longer documenting just for myself. I was building a record. Still, fear gnawed at me. What if he succeeded? What if the startup signed him and I became the bitter sister accusing him without proof? My career would be over. The bruise on my chest throbbed as I bent over the keyboard, and I knew one truth. I could not stay silent anymore. Later that week, Jason strutted into the house, bragging loudly on the phone. "Yeah, man, meeting's on Friday. Investors are excited." He paced the living room repeating buzzwords he barely understood. Scalability integration user base. I recorded him discreetly from the hallway, capturing every boastful line. He noticed nothing too consumed with his imagined stardom. That night, I lay awake staring at the crack in my ceiling. My entire body ached with exhaustion, but my mind whirred with plans. I knew I could not fight this alone. I needed someone outside this toxic circle, someone who believed me. The memory of Amira surfaced. Amira Khan, my old college friend, brilliant, determined, relentless. She had gone into compliance law before burning out and freelancing, but she had always been the kind of person who never backed down from injustice. We had not spoken in years, but as I thought of her clear voice and unwavering focus, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe she could guide me. Maybe she could help me build a wall between their sabotage and my survival. The next morning, I drafted a simple message. "Amira, it is Nora. I need help. It has been a long time, but I do not know who else to call." I stared at the screen before pressing send. My heart pounded as though I had crossed an invisible line. Hours later, my phone buzzed. A text from her. "Call me tonight." My hands shook as I read the words. For the first time in years, I felt I was not entirely alone. Jason and Harold could steal my money and my work, but they could not stop me from finding allies. They did not know it yet, but the theft of my dream project was not the end of my story. It was the catalyst for everything that would follow. When I finally dialed Amira's number that night, my hands were damp with sweat and my voice shook before I even spoke. She answered on the second ring, her tone calm but alert. "Nora," she said softly, "it has been years. What happened?" For a moment, I could not form the words. The silence between us stretched until I forced myself to breathe and tell her everything. I spoke in a rush about Harold's violence, about the $15,000 demand, about Jason stealing my project and pitching it to a startup. I confessed how HR had opened a file on me because of anonymous complaints and how I knew Harold was behind it. Every sentence felt like opening an old wound, but Amira listened without interruption. When I finally stopped my chest heaving, she said 4 words that steadied me. "We are going to document," she explained with lawyerly precision. "First, you need evidence, screenshots, recordings, bills, anything that proves a pattern of coercion and theft. Second, you change every password immediately and secure backups off the family network. Third, you record the physical damage. Pictures of bruises, date, stamped and stored somewhere safe." My breath caught. "But if they find out?" "Nora," she interrupted, "you cannot keep living like this. They have escalated. It will not stop." Her conviction pierced through my fear. For the first time, I felt like someone was on my side, someone who saw the truth without minimizing it. I promised to follow her instructions. That night, I photographed the bruise spreading across my ribs. The colors had darkened into shades of purple and black, like ink spilled beneath my skin. I stored the images in a hidden cloud account separate from anything Jason could access. I screenshotted his TikTok posts boasting about the startup collab and saved the audio recording of him bragging on the phone. Each file I collected felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The next day at work, I kept my head down, but inside I carried a new determination. I was not just surviving anymore. I was preparing. Amira called again in the evening. Her voice was firm but encouraging. "You have leverage now. With proof, you are not just a victim, you are a witness. We can use that." She reminded me to breathe, to take it step by step. "Do not confront them yet," she warned. "Play it quiet. Let them think they are winning." That advice settled into me like a shield. If silence had once been my cage, now it would become my weapon. At home, Jason strutted around bragging about his upcoming meeting. Harold sat in his chair barking at the television. Linda hummed as usual. None of them noticed the shift in my posture the way I observed instead of reacting. I made dinner quietly, smiling faintly as Jason shoved his dirty plate toward me. They thought I was broken, but inside, I was cataloging every detail. Later that week, Amira sent me a list of resources including numbers for the National Domestic Violence Hotline and legal aid clinics. Just read them, she said. You do not have to call unless you are ready. Late one night, when the house was finally still, I dialed the hotline but gave no name. I just asked what steps someone in my situation could take. The voice on the other end was gentle, understanding, but clear. Keep your records safe, find allies, plan an exit. When I hung up, I cried not from despair, but from the strange relief of being believed. The bruise still hurt, but it felt less suffocating knowing someone out there knew the truth. Amira became my lifeline. We did not talk every day, but whenever I started to sink, she pulled me back with clarity. She reminded me that control was not love and that survival was not enough. One evening, she said something that struck deep. You are allowed to want more than just not bleeding. You are allowed to want peace. I repeated those words to myself as I locked my bedroom door that night. Peace. The idea felt fragile but real. In the weeks that followed, I played my part in the house. I handed Jason $20 when he claimed he needed gas. I nodded when Harold barked orders. I smiled politely at Linda's empty questions. All the while, my hidden folder of evidence grew. Every laugh Jason faked for his followers, every slurred threat Harold made when drunk, every bill I paid while they called me ungrateful, I recorded it all. The crack in my ceiling watched over me like an ally, silent but steady. And beneath that fractured plaster, I planned. They believed they had stolen everything from me, my money, my career, my project. But what they had really given me was motive and proof. Amira's return reminded me that I was not powerless. I was patient, and patience in the face of tyranny was not weakness. It was preparation. The nights became my sanctuary. While the house slept, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my bedroom laptop, open phone in hand, cataloging everything they had ever used against me. Each file saved, each screenshot captured, felt like reclaiming air that had been stolen from my lungs. I replayed Jason's call where he bragged about pitching my system to a startup. I trimmed the audio so the words were crisp, undeniable. I saved the TikTok clip of him pointing at my interface with a grin that was not his to wear. I collected every bill I had paid under my name, for years, electricity, water, mortgage, even Jason's phone plan. The folder grew heavy with proof, and with it so did my resolve. Amira's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it quiet. Let them think they are winning. That way, when you move, you will not just have anger, you will have evidence. By day, I maintained the act of compliance. I folded laundry when Linda asked. I answered Harold with yes, sir, when he demanded small tasks. I even cooked Jason's favorite pasta one evening, listening to him boast about his future investor meeting. He did not notice the faint smile on my face or the phone recording from my pocket capturing every word. They thought they had beaten me into submission. They mistook my silence for defeat. They never realized silence could also mean strategy. One night, Harold came home drunk. His words slurred, but his tone still commanding. He ranted to Linda about how kids these days had no respect. Sometimes you gotta hit them to keep them in line, he muttered, chuckling at his own cruelty. My hands trembled as I pressed record beneath the table. The audio caught every word, every laugh. I stored it with the rest. That was the moment I knew the tide was shifting. It was not just me bleeding anymore. They were handing me weapons with their own arrogance. Around that time, I called the National Domestic Violence Hotline again, this time staying longer on the line. I still withheld my name, but I described the situation in detail. The counselor listened carefully, then spoke with calm authority. You are not crazy. This is abuse. What you are doing, documenting everything, is exactly right. But please do not underestimate the danger. Plan your steps. Do not confront directly. Find safe allies. Her words wrapped around me like armor. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I hung up and sat quietly, tears rolling down my cheeks. Not tears of despair, but of recognition. Someone had validated what I already knew deep down. This was not family. This was control masquerading as love. My nightly rituals expanded. I scanned expired pill bottles that Linda kept in a kitchen drawer, some of which she quietly passed to neighbors who could not afford prescriptions. I took photos of them lined up on the table with dates clearly visible. I noted down times when Jason streamed late into the night, begging followers for donations while I paid the Wi-Fi bill. I captured Harold's tirades about how his badge still carried weight in town. Every artifact was a brick in the foundation I was laying. I began to back up everything to multiple places, an encrypted drive hidden at work, a secure folder in the cloud, a USB stick I carried in my purse. If Jason discovered one copy, he would not find the others. The process gave me focus. The bruise on my ribs was fading, but in its place, something sharper was forming. Determination. My coworkers noticed a change. "Nora, you seem calmer," one said as we walked out of a meeting. I smiled faintly. Inside, I was anything but calm, but the outward composure was useful. At home, Harold interpreted it as obedience. Jason saw it as indifference. Linda perhaps suspected, but chose not to ask. Their misinterpretation was my shield. Weeks passed. Jason's big startup meeting loomed closer, and his arrogance grew unbearable. He strutted around the house practicing fake pitches using jargon he barely understood. Scalability integration user base. I recorded it all. Amira reviewed the evidence with me during late-night calls. Her voice carried satisfaction. "This is solid," she said. "This is not just hearsay. This is a pattern. You are building a case." Still, she cautioned me. "Do not reveal your hand too soon. Let them unravel themselves." One evening after dinner, Jason waved his phone in my face. "Check this out," he said, grinning. "The startup just emailed me again. They want to see a prototype next week." I swallowed my rage and forced a smile. "That is great, Jason." His smirk widened, thinking I had accepted defeat. But that night, I sent Amira the audio, the screenshots, the documents. She helped me draft a cease and desist letter carefully worded citing intellectual property rights. It was ready to be sent at the right moment. Meanwhile, Harold continued to bark orders, and Linda continued to hum through the chaos. But inside me, a storm had settled into strategy. I no longer felt the frantic panic of someone drowning. I felt the steady pulse of someone swimming toward shore. Every recording, every photo, every whispered word to the hotline was a stroke forward. The crack in my ceiling no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a roadmap, a reminder that fractures could expand until walls fell apart. One night, lying awake, I whispered to myself, "They think silence means submission. But silence is planning. Silence is power. And when the time came to break that silence, the world would hear not just my voice, but the chorus of evidence I had collected." The morning of Jason's big meeting, I sat at my desk at work, my phone buzzing with messages from Amira. "Today is the day," she wrote. "Are you ready?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, then typed back, "Yes." She had already sent the cease and desist to the startup's legal team, citing intellectual property theft with attached evidence. My screenshots, my timestamps, my code samples, and even Jason's own words bragging about stealing it. It was airtight. By noon, I received confirmation. The startup had responded swiftly and decisively. They respected intellectual property rights, they said, and would not be moving forward with Jason Ellis. They thanked the rightful developer me for bringing the matter to their attention. I sat frozen, staring at the email, while a rush of relief and fury collided inside me. Relief that my work was protected. Fury that it had even come to this. Later that afternoon, Jason stormed into the house, his face red, his phone clutched in his hand. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. His voice cracked with panic, not bravado. "You ruined everything." I stayed seated at the kitchen table, calmly stirring my tea. "Just reclaiming what is mine," I replied. Harold's chair creaked as he stood, his eyes narrowing with rage. "You do not get to make decisions like that in this house," he barked. I lifted my gaze slowly. Then it is a good thing I will not be staying in this house much longer. The room went still. Jason sputtered. Linda wrung her hands at the sink, whispering, "Nora, please." But Harold's fury boiled over. He slammed his fist onto the table. "You think you can walk away after all we have done for you?" I looked him in the eye, feeling the bruise on my ribs still ache. "All you have done is take." My words were low but sharp. For once, he had no immediate reply. The silence pressed heavy until Jason finally threw his phone onto the table. "You are such a drama queen," he sneered. "Always acting like a victim. Nobody owes you anything." I stood carefully, my body still tender, but my resolve stronger than ever. I never said anyone owed me anything. I just stopped letting people steal from me and call it love. Their faces shifted, stunned by the version of me that did not cry or apologize. I walked away, leaving them speechless. But the unraveling did not stop there. 2 days later, Harold's world began to crack. The audio recording of his drunken rant had been sent anonymously to the police ethics board by Amira's contacts. In it, his voice was unmistakable, boasting about hitting his children and laughing about how sometimes you gotta do it to keep them in line. The board moved quickly, announcing an investigation into his conduct and his role as a retired chief who still held sway in community organizations. Harold had always wrapped himself in the cloak of honor, but now that cloak was burning. Word spread fast through Fort Collins. Neighbors whispered. Former colleagues distanced themselves. The man who once commanded respect was now the subject of shame. Meanwhile, Linda faced her own collapse. A neighbor reported her for distributing expired prescriptions after one too many quiet exchanges at the fence line. Soon, an inspector came by asking questions. Her calm facade cracked under scrutiny. She stopped posting her cheerful church outfits on Facebook. She moved through the house with silent dread and no longer humming. Jason's empire crumbled fastest. The startup not only cut ties but also flagged his name quietly in the industry. Screenshots of his TikTok bragging and the cease and desist leaked online through forums where developers exchanged stories. Suddenly, he was labeled a fraud, a clout chaser, a thief. Donations dried up. Followers mocked him. The golden boy's glow dimmed under the harsh light of exposure. I watched all of this unfold from a distance. I did not gloat publicly. I did not taunt them. That would have given them power. Instead, I let the silence speak. Each consequence was not my revenge, but their own actions echoing back at them. At work, my project resumed under my name, clean and protected. The veterans who needed it would soon have access to real care. Each day I coded felt like stitching myself back together. Harold called once, leaving a voicemail, his voice strained unfamiliar. "Nora, we need to talk. Things are getting difficult." I let it go unanswered. Linda texted, "I don't know what is happening, but please remember, we are family." I did not reply. Jason sent a single message. "Hope you are proud of yourself." I deleted it without hesitation. Pride was not the word. Survival was as the silence I gave them was the loudest answer. For decades, they had demanded obedience and gratitude in exchange for violence and theft. Now they had nothing but the echoes of their own unraveling. In the quiet of my new apartment, miles away from their crumbling house, I breathed freely. The crack in my old ceiling was gone, but its image stayed with me, a reminder that fractures only grow when ignored. And now, it was not my fracture to bear. It was theirs. The night I decided to leave for good was not marked by shouting or violence, but by a silence so heavy it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I packed slowly in my room, folding clothes into 2 bags and sliding my laptop into its case. I did not bother with the old furniture or the framed photos on the dresser. Those belonged to the life they had constructed around me, a life of obedience and denial. I only took what mattered, the proof of who I was and what I had built. As I zipped the final bag, I paused, staring at the crack in the ceiling one last time. It had stretched wider over the years, jagged and unhealed. I whispered a quiet farewell not to the house, but to the version of myself who had stared at that fracture every night, waiting for something to change. Downstairs, the television droned and Jason muttered curses under his breath, scrolling endlessly on his phone. Harold sat in his recliner silent for once, his pride wounded by whispers in the community. Linda moved about the kitchen without her usual hum, her silence more revealing than words. None of them looked up as I descended the stairs. I paused at the threshold of the kitchen, the weight of decades pressing against my ribs. My bags felt light compared to the heaviness of staying. I set down my keys on the counter, a final offering to the house that had demanded everything. Harold glanced at me, then looked away. Jason did not notice. Linda whispered my name, but her voice held no command, only weariness. I did not answer. I walked to the front door, my steps steady. When I opened it, the cool night air rushed against my face, sharp and cleansing. For the first time in years, I felt the sky above me not as something distant, but as freedom. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. It clicked softly like the closing of a cell. The street was quiet, lined with dark trees swaying gently. I breathed deep, each inhale a rebellion, each exhale a release. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my car, hands trembling not from fear but from exhilaration. As I slid into the driver's seat, I looked once more at the house. Its windows glowed dimly, the porch light flickered, and the structure that had contained so much pain appeared smaller somehow. I realized then it had never been a fortress. It was a cage, and cages lose their power the moment you walk out. The drive to Denver was long, but the miles passed in a blur. I kept the radio off, savoring the sound of my own breathing, the rhythm of tires on asphalt. Every mile marker felt like shedding another chain. By the time the city skyline appeared in the distance, I felt lighter than I had in years. The apartment was small, noisy, and imperfect. The paint peeled in places, and the radiator clanked at night, but when I turned the key and stepped inside, it was mine. I dropped my bags onto the floor and stood in the center of the empty room, letting silence wash over me. Not the suffocating silence of Harold's reign, but the stillness of peace. I lay that first night on a borrowed mattress, listening to the hum of traffic outside. No one yelled, no one demanded, no one watched. My body ached, but my heart was steady. For the first time in my adult life, I belonged only to myself. The first morning in my Denver apartment, sunlight streamed through the thin blinds, casting stripes of gold across the bare walls. I sat on the floor, sipping instant coffee from a paper cup, my belongings still scattered around me. The city hummed outside with sirens and traffic, a steady reminder that life continued beyond the walls of that house. For the first time in years, I felt no dread about walking into a kitchen. No fear of raised voices or sudden blows. The silence here was not oppressive, it was liberating. Yet freedom carried its own weight. The bruise across my ribs had faded to a deep yellow, but each time I stretched too far, I winced. The physical pain was temporary, but the scars inside ran deeper. I knew I could not carry them alone. That week, I searched for therapy options, scrolling through lists, until I found a counselor specializing in trauma and family abuse. I hesitated before dialing the number, my hands trembling, as if Harold could somehow hear the call. But when the receptionist answered and scheduled my first session, I felt a flicker of control return. The first session was harder than I imagined. I sat stiffly across from the therapist, words lodged in my throat. When she asked about my family, I stared at the floor, unable to speak. Years of silence do not unravel easily. Finally, I whispered, "He kicked me because I said no." Her eyes softened. "That is not love," she said firmly. "That is control." The tears came then, not from sadness, but from recognition. Someone else had named the truth out loud. In the following sessions, I began to piece together the difference between love and ownership. I learned that enduring abuse was not loyalty. I began to see the pattern of control that stretched back to childhood. Each week, I left her office lighter. Therapy was not magic, but it was a mirror, and in it, I saw a woman worth saving. Meanwhile, my work slowly blossomed again. With Amira's help, I secured a small grant from a regional program supporting veterans' technology. The funding was modest, but enough to rebuild veterans' telecare properly under my name. When the email arrived confirming the award, I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the validation soak into me. My name was on the document, not Jason's, not Harold's, mine. I threw myself into coding late nights in the apartment, my laptop humming on the kitchen counter. Slowly, the platform returned piece by piece, cleaner and stronger than before. I backed up everything in triplicate, unwilling to risk another theft. Each line of code felt like stitching myself together. By autumn, I had my first contract with a nonprofit clinic serving rural veterans. The director shook my hand firmly during a video call and said, "We are proud to work with you, Nora." I muted the microphone afterward and cried quietly at my desk. Pride had been used as a weapon in my old house, twisted into obedience. Now it was something pure earned honestly. Outside of work, I started building a life that was mine alone. I bought secondhand furniture and decorated the apartment with plants that thrived in sunlight. On weekends, I visited the farmer's market, wandering without fear of returning late. I reconnected with friends who had once stopped calling because I always canceled under family obligations. Some relationships revived, slowly others fell away, but each reconnection reminded me that I was not defined by Harold's shadow. Therapy sessions grew less heavy over time. One day, the therapist asked me to describe myself without mentioning my family. I paused, then said quietly, "I am a developer, a survivor, and I want peace." The words felt solid, like bricks laid into the foundation of a new life. I began journaling again, something I had abandoned during the worst years. My first entry was simple, "I choose myself." The phrase repeated across pages until it became a mantra. On the wall of my bedroom, I taped the X-ray of my cracked rib, not as a token of pain, but as a medal of survival. Each morning when I dressed, I saw it and reminded myself that healing was not weakness. It was proof that I had endured and still moved forward. The city around me became part of my recovery. The sound of trains passing, the laughter of strangers outside, bars, the music from buskers in the park, all reminded me that life was wider than Harold's house. In those sounds, I found belonging. I was no longer the girl silenced by fear. I was a woman building a future on her own terms. Healing was slow, uneven, and at times exhausting, but it was real. I was no longer surviving. I was beginning to live. The unraveling of the Ellis household came quietly at first, then all at once, like a structure collapsing under its own rotten beams. Harold, once the proud retired chief, found himself whispered about in diners and ignored at community meetings. The ethics board investigation did not end in formal charges, but the leaked audio was enough to tarnish his reputation beyond repair. Invitations dried up. Old friends stopped calling. For a man who thrived on control and respect, the silence was a harsher punishment than prison. Jason's fall was swifter. His TikTok followers turned against him after the startup publicly distanced themselves, citing concerns over intellectual property. Clips of his brags circulated online labeled fraud and clout chaser. His donations vanished. Collaborators blocked him. The golden boy who had once strutted through the house now sulked in corners, refreshing his phone for validation that never came. Linda withdrew into herself. Neighbors whispered about the expired pills. Church acquaintances stopped sitting beside her. She no longer hummed while cleaning. She moved through rooms like a ghost, as if trying to erase her complicity through silence. Their house, once filled with arrogance, grew quiet, but not the liberating quiet I had found. It was the quiet of shame. Meanwhile, my own life steadied. Veterans Telecare grew, gaining small contracts and recognition. At conferences, I presented the platform under my own name, my voice clear and steady. Each handshake, each nod of respect rebuilt the self they had tried to erase. Amira stood beside me more than an ally, a reminder that trust could exist outside family. Therapy continued shaping the edges of my healing, teaching me that guilt was not loyalty and silence was not peace. One evening, I received a voicemail from Harold, his voice strained. "Nora, things are falling apart. We need you." For years, those words would have pulled me back, but now they only confirmed the truth. They did not miss me. They missed what I provided. I deleted the message without reply. Jason sent a single text. "Hope you are proud of yourself." I was not proud of his downfall, but I was proud that I had survived despite it. Linda wrote once saying, "We are still family. That means something." I stared at the words before closing the message. Family is not a leash. Family is not obedience. Family is not bleeding for others while they call it love. Family is chosen, and I had chosen myself. In quiet moments, I still thought of that crack in my old ceiling, the scar above my bed that had watched me endure year after year. I imagined it widening until the house itself caved in. That crack had been a mirror of me once broken and ignored. Now I carried no ceiling above me, only sky. My apartment was filled with plants, sunlight, and the soft hum of my computer running lines of code that built futures instead of cages. I did not need their approval to validate my worth. I had written my own story with blood, yes, but also with resilience. Surviving is not living, I told myself each morning. Living begins the day you stop bleeding for others. That was my moral, my closure. Their empire of control collapsed, not because I screamed, but because I walked away and let the truth echo in the emptiness they had created. I was free.